The fluorescent lights of Space Station Artemis lower decks flickered ominously as Dr. Kira Patel made her way through the abandoned maintenance corridor. Her boots echoed against the metal floor, each step punctuated by distant creaks and groans of the station's aging infrastructure. As the station's lead xenobiologist, she was used to dealing with unusual life forms, but the reports from maintenance crews about something lurking in these corridors had caught her attention. "Life signs are getting stronger," she muttered, studying the readings on her handheld scanner. The energy signature was unlike anything she'd encountered before, a curious mixture of biological and synthetic patterns that shouldn't exist together. A sharp clang echoed through the corridor, followed by a low, rumbling sound that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. Kira froze, her heart pounding. The sound came again, closer this time, accompanied by the scrape of something heavy dragging across metal. "Hello," she called out, her voice steady despite her racing pulse. "I'm not here to harm you." The response was immediate. A massive shape detached itself from the shadows ahead. Kira's breath caught in her throat as she took in the creature before her. It stood nearly 3 meters tall, its body covered in iridescent scales that shifted between deep purple and midnight blue. 6 eyes glowed with an inner light, arranged in a pattern across its elongated head. But what struck Kira most wasn't its size or its alien appearance. It was the obvious signs of genetic manipulation. The creature's body bore the telltale marks of extensive bioengineering, with synthetic ports and neural interfaces embedded in its scales. The creature's 6 eyes fixed on her, and Kira felt a sudden pressure in her mind, a tentative psychic touch that carried overwhelming feelings of fear, loneliness, and pain. She staggered under the emotional onslaught, but kept her ground. "You're telepathic," she gasped, fighting to maintain her mental barriers. "And you're hurting." The creature withdrew slightly, the psychic pressure easing. As it moved, Kira noticed the way it favored its left side, where several neural ports seemed to be malfunctioning, sparking occasionally. "I'm a doctor," she said softly, taking a careful step forward. "I might be able to help." The creature's response was a complex mixture of hope and distrust, its thoughts fragmenting into her mind like broken glass. Images flashed through her consciousness: a laboratory, scientists in environmental suits, pain, and then abandonment. This wasn't just any experimental creature. It was a drachnid, a sentient species known for their psychic abilities, but this one had been modified, enhanced, and then discarded when the experiments went wrong. "You're a sentinel," Kira realized, recognizing the neural interface's design. They engineered you to be a guardian, didn't they? But something went wrong with the implementation. The creature, the drachnid, lowered its head slightly, a gesture that seemed almost shameful. Another wave of images hit Kira, the drachnid trying to control its enhanced abilities, accidentally causing pain to those around it, being feared and rejected, fleeing to these abandoned corridors. "You can't fully control the psychic amplification," she said, understanding dawning. "That's why they abandoned you. They couldn't handle what they'd created." The drachnid moved closer, its movements cautious but deliberate. Up close, Kira could see the beautiful patterns in its scales, the intelligence in its eyes. This wasn't a monster or a failed experiment. It was a conscious being in pain. "I'm going to call you Vorax," she said, reaching out slowly. "It means guardian in ancient Earth Latin. And I promise you, you're not going to be alone anymore." Vorax's response was immediate, a surge of emotion so pure and grateful that tears sprang to Kira's eyes. But as she reached for her communicator to call for medical assistance, an alarm blared through the station. "Attention all personnel. The Station A announced, "Unauthorized biological entity detected in Maintenance Section D security teams en route. Please evacuate the area immediately." Kira looked at Vorax, seeing the fear in its eyes. "Don't worry," she said firmly, stepping between the corridor entrance and the Drachnid. "They'll have to go through me first." As the sound of approaching security teams echoed through the corridors, Kira made her choice. She wasn't going to let another intelligent being suffer for the mistakes of others. Whatever came next, she would protect Vorax, not just because it needed help, but because in those brief moments of psychic connection, she had seen something extraordinary, a being capable of incredible compassion, despite all it had endured. The security teams were getting closer, their heavy boots thundering against the metal floors. Kira squared her shoulders, her mind already racing through possible solutions. She had about 5 minutes to convince heavily armed security personnel that the monster behind her was actually a sentient being worthy of protection. She'd faced tough audiences in scientific conferences before, but this would be her most important presentation yet. "Trust me," she whispered to Vorax, feeling its uncertainty and fear. "Sometimes the most beautiful things in the universe are the ones others are too afraid to understand." The quarantine lab on Level 7 of Space Station Artemis was never meant to house something as large as Vorax. Kira had spent the last 12 hours arguing with station security, the medical board, and 3 different administrative committees just to get the Drachnid moved here instead of being placed in a holding cell. Now, as she watched Vorax through the observation window, she couldn't help but feel a mixture of triumph and concern. "Dr. Petal," a stern voice called from behind her. "The board requires your preliminary report." Kira turned to face Chief Administrator Thask, a tall Centaurian whose crystalline features were arranged in their species equivalent of a frown. The administrator's translucent fingers tapped against a datapad impatiently. "With all due respect," Kira replied, "I've only had a few hours with Vorax. There's still so much we don't understand about." "What we understand," Thask interrupted, their crystal structure flickering with irritation, "is that you're harboring a dangerous experimental weapon that's already injured 3 maintenance workers with its uncontrolled psychic outbursts. Those incidents happened because Vorax was scared and hungry," Kira countered. "Since I've been working with them, there hasn't been a single psychic disturbance. Look." She gestured to the neural activity monitors. "The patterns are stabilizing." Inside the quarantine lab, Vorax had arranged its massive form into a surprisingly compact position, all 6 eyes focused on a holographic display Kira had set up. The display showed complex mathematical equations, a communication method they'd discovered worked better than words. "Fascinating, isn't it?" Kira continued, her voice softening. "Vorax isn't just sentient. They're brilliant. Those equations. They're solving quantum mechanical problems that our best computers struggle with. The neural interfaces weren't just for defense. They were designed to enhance natural computational abilities." Thask moved closer to the window, their crystalline form refracting the lab's lights. "And that's precisely what concerns us, Doctor. This creature was engineered by the Vortithi, a species known for creating biological weapons. How do we know this isn't some sort of infiltration attempt?" Before Kira could respond, a gentle pressure touched her mind. Vorax had noticed their discussion and was projecting, not the chaotic burst of emotions from their first meeting, but a carefully controlled stream of images and feelings. Kira gasped as understanding flooded her consciousness. They're showing me why they were created," she said slowly. "The Vortithi weren't building weapons. They were trying to create guardians. Something is coming, Administrator." something that terrified them enough to attempt this level of genetic engineering. The images continued, showing vast dark shapes moving between stars, worlds going dark, entire systems falling silent. Vorax's memories carried a deep sense of purpose, but also bitter disappointment. The neural interfaces were supposed to allow them to detect and communicate warnings about this approaching threat, but the psychic amplification had proved too powerful, too painful for their creators to control. Rather than try to understand what they'd created, Kira said quietly, they abandoned their greatest achievement because it didn't fit their expectations of perfection. Fask's crystalline form shifted, a sign of discomfort among their species. Even if what you say is true, the station cannot risk. They were interrupted by a sudden commotion in the lab. Vorax had risen to their full height, all 6 eyes blazing with an intense inner light. The neural interfaces along their scales began to pulse with energy, but instead of the chaotic bursts from before, there was a pattern to it. The holographic display flickered and changed, showing a star map of the surrounding sector. Administrator, Kira breathed, they're trying to show us something. The map zoomed in on a particular region of space, highlighting a series of anomalies that shouldn't have been there, distortions in spacetime that were moving, slowly but deliberately, toward populated systems. This is what they were created to warn against, Kira explained, her voice urgent. But nobody would listen because they were too afraid of Vorax's appearance, too quick to judge something they didn't understand. Fask stood silent for a long moment, their crystalline structure processing this new information. Finally, they turned to Kira. You have 48 hours, Dr. Petal. Prove to me that this creature can control its abilities, that it's more valuable as an ally than a threat. After that, the board will make its final decision. As the administrator left, Kira pressed her hand against the observation window. Vorax turned their massive head toward her, and she felt a gentle touch in her mind, gratitude, determination, and something else, something that felt surprisingly like hope. We'll show them, she whispered. We'll show them all what you really are. But as she began preparing for the tests that would determine Vorax's fate, a notification flashed on her datapad, an alert about unusual energy signatures at the edge of the station's sensor range. Looking at the readings, Kira felt her blood run cold. The patterns matched exactly what Vorax had shown them in the star map. Whatever was coming, it was coming faster than anyone had expected. And now Kira had to prove Vorax's worth, not just to save one life, but possibly to save them all. In the quarantine lab, Vorax's neural interfaces pulsed with a steady rhythm, like a heartbeat made of light, as they continued to solve impossible equations, preparing for a battle that only they could see coming. The emergency meeting of Station Artemis's Command Council had been going for 3 hours when the first sensor arrays went dark. Kira stood before the gathered officials, her hands steady as she manipulated the holographic display showing Vorax's latest predictions. The pattern matches exactly, she insisted, highlighting the cascading failures across the station's outer defense grid. Just as Vorax warned us, these aren't random malfunctions. Something is systematically testing our defenses. Fleet Commander Raxa, a veteran of the Regelian Defense Force, leaned forward in her hover chair. Her cybernetic eye whirred as it analyzed the data. Dr. Patel, while your companion's predictions have been accurate so far, you're asking us to commit significant resources based on the word of a single engineered creature. With respect, Commander, Kira countered, Vorax has already proven their worth. The mathematical models they've developed have improved our sensor efficiency by 300%. We're seeing things out there we never could before. Yes, interrupted Security Chief Wells. His weathered face creased with concern. "And what we're seeing is terrifying." He gestured to the latest scans. "These energy signatures suggest technology far beyond anything in known space. If these are indeed the threats the Vortithi were preparing for." A sudden tremor ran through the station, causing the lights to flicker. Moments later, alarms began blaring across all decks. "Multiple contacts," the station's A announced. "Unknown configuration, approaching from Vector 793. Energy signatures do not match any known profiles." Kira's datapad lit up with an urgent message from the quarantine lab. Vorax was projecting intensely, their neural interfaces pulsing with unprecedented patterns. "They're trying to tell us something," she said, her voice tight with urgency. "I need to get back to the lab." Commander Raxa's cybernetic eye flashed. "Go. Chief Wells, begin emergency protocols. All non-essential personnel to shelter zones. This is not a drill." Kira ran through corridors now filled with hurrying station residents. When she reached the quarantine lab, she found Vorax in a state she'd never seen before. All 6 eyes were blazing with internal light, and the neural interfaces across their scales were creating complex geometric patterns of energy. "What is it?" she asked, dropping her mental barriers to receive their projection. "What are you seeing?" The images that flooded her mind were both beautiful and terrifying. Vast living ships, composed of some sort of biomechanical material that absorbed light itself. But more than that, she saw their purpose. These weren't just invaders, they were harvesters. They consumed the very essence of civilizations, breaking down technology and biological material to add to their own mass. "That's why the Vortithi created you," Kira whispered in realization. They needed something that could communicate with these beings, understand their technology, find a weakness. Vorax's response was immediate and intense. More images filled Kira's mind. The neural interfaces weren't just for communication or computation. They were designed to generate specific energy frequencies, frequencies that could disrupt the harvester's biomechanical systems. But the power required. Kira's eyes widened. That's why the implementations failed. No single drachnid could channel that much energy safely. The strain would be. She was interrupted by another violent tremor. The station's AI voice crackled over the speakers. "Warning! Unknown vessels attempting to breach outer hull. Defensive systems at 60% and falling." Vorax rose to their full height, their massive forms seeming to pulse with contained energy. The emotion they projected was clear: determination, mixed with resignation. They had been created for this moment, and they were ready to fulfill their purpose, even if it meant their own destruction. "No," Kira said firmly, understanding their intention. "There has to be another way. The neural interfaces, they were designed wrong. The Vortithi tried to force all the power through a single system. But what if?" She rushed to her console, fingers flying over the controls. "What if we could distribute the load? Use the station's power grid as a carrier wave?" Vorax's 6 eyes fixed on her, and she felt their surprise, followed by growing excitement as they grasped her idea. The station's power grid could act as an amplifier, allowing Vorax to generate the disruption frequency without overloading their own systems. But before they could implement their plan, a new alarm sounded, more urgent than any before. "Hull breach detected in sectors 7 through 9, the AI announced. "Unknown biological entities have entered the station. Security teams engaging. Security teams no longer responding. All personnel, implement emergency lockdown procedures immediately." Through their connection, Kira felt Vorax's fierce protective instinct surge. The drachnid moved toward the quarantine lab's door, their intention clear. "Wait," Kira said, grabbing her toolkit. "We do this together. I'll need to modify power relays as we go, create a network you can sync with." She looked up at the massive creature who had gone from feared outcast to possibly their only hope of survival. Partners. Vorax lowered their head to her level, all 6 eyes glowing with affection and resolve. The feeling they projected was simple but powerful. Together. As they stepped out into the chaos of the station's corridors, Kira couldn't help but smile grimly. They were about to find out if what everyone had seen as Vorax's greatest flaw might actually be the key to saving them all. The corridors of Station Artemis had become a nightmare landscape of twisted metal and organic growths. The Harvester's biomechanical infection spread through the station's systems like a virus, converting everything it touched. Kira and Vorax moved swiftly through the chaos, stopping at key power junctions where Kira's skilled hands modified the relays to create their improvised network. Junction 7 locked in, Kira announced, closing the access panel. 3 more to go. Through their strengthening mental bond, she felt Vorax's growing strain. The Drachnid was already channeling energy through their neural interfaces, creating a protective field that kept the Harvester's corruption at bay. But it wouldn't last forever. They encountered survivors along the way, station personnel, and civilians huddled in makeshift safe zones. Instead of fear, Kira now saw hope in their eyes when they saw Vorax. Word had spread about what they were trying to do. Commander Raxa's voice crackled over the emergency channel. "Dr. Puttle, we're losing containment on Deck 12. These things, they're not just breaking in, they're converting our own people." Kira saw the horror through Vorax's enhanced senses. Station residents being absorbed into the Harvester's collective, their bodies and minds transformed into extensions of the alien consciousness. Each loss felt like a physical blow to the empathic Drachnid. They reached the final junction near the station's power core. As Kira worked, Vorax suddenly stiffened. Through their bond, she felt it. The Harvesters had noticed what they were doing. They were coming. "Almost there," Kira muttered, her fingers flying over the circuits. "Just need to balance the power distribution." The wall beside them suddenly bulged inward, biomechanical tendrils punching through the metal. Vorax moved with incredible speed, placing their massive body between Kira and the threat. The neural interfaces across their scales blazed with energy as they fought to hold back the corruption. Done. Kira slammed the panel shut. Vorax, now. What happened next would be remembered in station logs as the luminous moment. Vorax connected to the modified power grid, their neural interfaces synchronizing with the station's energy network. The pain was immediate and intense. Kira felt it through their bond, dropping to her knees as Vorax channeled more power than any single being was meant to handle. But this time, something was different. The load was distributed, shared between Vorax's enhanced systems and the station's power grid. Instead of fighting the energy, they became a conduit for it. Vorax's 6 eyes blazed like newborn stars. Their body became a living constellation of light, each neural interface point generating the precise frequency needed to disrupt the Harvester's biomechanical systems. The energy pulse radiated outward through the station's structure, carried by the modified power network. Where it touched the Harvester's corruption, the alien matter began to break down. The converted sections of the station reverted to their original form. Throughout Artemis, the survivors watched in awe as waves of purifying energy swept through the corridors. But the strain on Vorax was enormous. Kira felt their life force wavering, their consciousness beginning to fade. "Stay with me," she pleaded, pressing her hand against their scales. "You're not alone anymore. We're all here with you. And they were. Through the power network, Kira felt the station's residents reaching out, not with technology, but with their minds, their hearts, their collective will to survive. Vorax had touched all their lives, shown them that true beauty lay in the courage to protect others, regardless of how you were perceived. The harvester ships in orbit began to break apart, their biomechanical structures unable to maintain coherence under the assault of Vorax's precisely tuned energy. As the threat dissolved into harmless particles, Vorax finally released their connection to the power grid, collapsing to the deck. Kira rushed to them, tears streaming down her face as she checked their vital signs. The neural interfaces were dark, but beneath her hands, she felt a pulse, weak but steady. "Medical team to power core," she called over the comm. "Priority 1. Vorax's eyes flickered open, all 6 focusing on her with tired affection. Through their weakened but intact bond, they shared a simple feeling, belonging. 3 months later, Station Artemis had been fully restored. In the central plaza, a new addition drew visitors from across the galaxy, a memorial that doubled as Vorax's permanent residence. The Drachnid had become a symbol of the station's resilience, their once feared appearance, now a reminder that strength comes in many forms. Kira stood with Administrator Thask, watching as Vorax used their restored neural interfaces to help calibrate the station's new defense systems. "The Vortithi contacted us again," Thask said, their crystalline form reflecting the light of distant stars. "They want Vorax back." Kira smiled. "What did you tell them?" "That Vorax already has a home." Thask's structure shifted in amusement. "And that perhaps they should learn to look beyond their own narrow definition of perfection." Above them, Vorax's scales shinned with patterns of light, not the desperate pulses of a creature in pain, but the confident glow of a being who had found their true purpose. Through their bond, Kira felt their contentment, their joy in being not just accepted, but celebrated for exactly who they were. In the end, what the Vortithi had seen as a flaw had become Artemis's greatest strength. Vorax's story taught them all that sometimes the things we fear most are exactly what we need to save us, not just from external threats, but from our own prejudices. And as Vorax continued their work, their 6 eyes bright with purpose, the stars themselves seemed to shine a little brighter, celebrating a truth as old as the universe itself. That true beauty lies not in perfection, but in the courage to be exactly who you are.